So hello, everyone from wherever you're connecting with us. My name is Sharon Kyoko. I use she, her pronouns. And welcome to this webinar focused on essentially the public finance concentration here at the Evans School of Public Policy. I believe, Jackie, you wanted me to talk a little bit about the concentration before I introduce the other panelists. So I'll go ahead and do that. So the Evans School has a public finance concentration or public finance option. And what that means is essentially you have the opportunity to take classes in this particular field. The way I describe public budgeting in finance is that it is an essential core skill that you need to have as a manager, irrespective of sector. So whether you're working in government, whether you're working in nonprofit, or you're working in for-profit, you really need to have that core budgeting, finance, and analytical tools. So when we start the curriculum in 522, or PubPol 522, we give you some core basic skills, and that includes how to read financial statements, how to interpret those financial statements and provide an assessment of the financial health of an organization. Then we move on to creating financial statements. So we ask you, how do you create a balance sheet, a statement of assets and liabilities? How do you create an income statement showing the revenues and expenses? And then how do you sort of give us, again, another assessment of that organization's financial position? And this time we're asking you to think about what strategies that manager can use going forward to manage the liquidity position, how much cash they have, profitability position, how much surplus they have, and solvency position in terms of how much debt or how much liabilities they have. And then the final part of the course, we get into budgeting. Here's where you actually get to make some decisions on how an organization is going to create a budget going forward. When we start with financial statements, we're really looking historically as to what the organization has done. And budgeting is more looking forward, what can the organization do? So we have the students create a budget from scratch of an organization with about $5 million in expenses. And we ask you to figure out how you're going to balance the deficit. And this organization has a deficit of about 10% of $500,000. And we ask you to propose some strategies to the board for the board to approve. And that will include expanding a program, eliminating a program, finding program efficiency, or really just being able to say we can actually change how we operate this program in order to have longevity going forward. But in the medium term, we might have a small deficit. So that is the only core class that we have, but we have a suite of electives that dig deeper into some of the important policy issues in budgeting and finance. We have one of our faculty members, Dwight Dively, is the King County Budget Director, and he teaches a couple of electives for us that focus on essentially how do you manage a government's resources? How do you administer a property tax? How do you administer a sales tax? How do you think about creating an income tax and make sure it is progressive? How do you choose between an income tax and user charges and fees, or an income tax and sales tax? So that's a fantastic policy-oriented course, but also a public administration course. I teach a class on financial modeling. So we think about how a government borrows money and how do we make that borrowing affordable and feasible, and how do we lower those borrowing costs. I also teach a class on nonprofit financial management. How do nonprofit organizations manage their investments? How do they manage their endowments? How do you think about the board structure and board governance, especially when it comes to the financial responsibility that board has to the organization? And then we have other courses focused not as tightly on budgeting and finance, but tangentially. So our faculty member, Ben Brunges, teaches an excellent class on grants and contracts, which are an essential part of how the federal government and state governments actually deliver services. They don't directly deliver these services. They contract out these services with nonprofits, with other governments, and with for-profit entities. So how do you create, structure, and review some of those contracts, and how do you hold the contractor in this place accountable for the outcomes that you were expecting? We also have a class that allows you to think about policy choices, and that one is called cost-benefit analysis. If you're going to implement a new policy, whatever that policy may be, what are the pros and cons, and how do you create a framework for assessing that, the pros and cons on that. And then Dr. Cohen teaches an excellent class for us on taxation and social policy, thinking about how a tax is structured, how it may create inequalities. When you think about the sales tax, it is a very regressive tax. And also exploring some of the new topics we're seeing in Congress, for example, the global corporate income tax or a wealth tax, and how those can actually make our tax structures even more progressive by taxing the top 1% or the top 0.1%, especially on the wealth tax. But it also explores how tax policy is an important part of social policy, thinking about programs like the Earned Income Tax Credit, the Child Tax Credit, but also thinking about how some of these policies actually create inequalities. So the home mortgage interest deduction has been shown to create further inequalities. We have seen how retirement contributions that are not taxed further exacerbate that inequality that we see in wealth across the United States. So that is the suite of courses that we offer for the public finance option, and I'm happy to open to questions. But first, I do want to introduce our panelists, and I'm going to start with one of our current students, Kathy. So Kathy Landry is a current MPA student, and she has been taking some of our public finance courses. Now, I keep on saying to my students, I'm a public finance wonk. I love finance. I can live in spreadsheets and budgeting and finance and financial statements all day, but I know it's not everybody's cup of tea. So Kathy, let me ask you the first question. What brought you to the Evans School?
Thanks, Dr. Kyoko. Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us this evening. I fortunately or unfortunately am also kind of a finance wonk. I came to the Evans School in large part because of the public finance and budgeting program option that I was really interested in pursuing. My work background is in project management, and if you've done anything in project management, you know that means you have to touch a million different facets of things. So I have no finance background prior to my work experience. I just learned some things on the job and realized that I loved it and was really interested in getting a more formal background in budgeting and learning more about financial management. And the Evans School has an excellent reputation as a public administration program with a strong public finance program option. And the other reason why I came to the Evans School over other programs is that I was really interested in getting more involved in local government and working like in the community where I live. My work background, again, is in more at the federal level and in internationally focused work. And I found that I really wanted to kind of see the impact of my work more and do things that were affecting my neighbors and the place where I was spending my time. So the Evans School, again, has a really strong reputation locally. I feel like every government organization in the Pacific Northwest is like full of Evans graduates. At least that's the way that it seems to me. So this was really kind of a no-brainer choice for me, and that it was kind of marrying those two career goals that I had. And I've been really happy with my choice. It's been a great fit for me.
So I know I talked a little bit briefly about the suite of classes that the Evans School offers. And I know you're already taking one of my electives, but could you give our panel of participants a sense of the public finance electives, and dig deeper into how they've allowed you to develop the skills that you think you'll need when you graduate from the program?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am taking 3 public finance electives this fall, and I'm also a teaching assistant for the first year required public finance course. So my life is kind of like all finance all the time right now. If you come to the Evans School, and it doesn't have to be that way, that's just how I wanted it to be. So I think that the electives I'm taking right now are doing a really nice job of pairing like kind of some hard skills with deepening the way that I think about how budgeting and finance impacts equity, and also impacts like kind of the way that decisions are made. So I'm taking the financial modeling course that Dr. Kyoko mentioned, as well as the cost benefit analysis class. And I think those are 2 classes that are really, for one, growing my Excel skills, and also introducing me to the world of municipal bonds and how governments take on debt in order to finance projects. But then the third class that I'm taking is the tax and social policy class, which talks a lot about like who is impacted by these choices. And if you choose to take on debt, like what does that mean for the other things that you need to spend money on, and how does that impact kind of like the whole picture of your government spending? And so I think those 3 have been a great complements for one another, and I'm really able to kind of bring in skills from one class into another, both in terms of like a lot of Excel work in the cost benefit and financial modeling class, and kind of like bringing those across, but also just taking discussions that are happening in one and bringing it into the other 2.
And then one last quick question. I just want you to reflect on your experience at the Evans School so far. How does this sort of fit into maybe other courses that you're taking at the Evans School? How does this fit into what you think would be your internship or your future career prospects, and also other activities on campus?
Yeah, so another way that finance is finding its way into my experience in the Evans School is through the my upcoming capstone project, which is kind of like your thesis at the end of your MPA program that we work on over the last 2 quarters. So mine has a finance focus for a local nonprofit here in Seattle, working on financial forecasting for them. So I'm really looking forward to getting started on that in January, or I guess like next week, but soon. And then some other things that I've done while I've been at Evans are, I think the biggest way that this is in my life right now is that I am actually the co-chair of the Evans Student Budget Council, which is like a participatory budgeting committee that takes student voices and student perspectives and elevates them to the level of the administration while the Evans School is doing its budget process for the upcoming fiscal year. So we run a survey with the whole student body to provide their input and what their priorities are for the way that the school spends its money. I work closely with the dean on that. And we've been working on how to improve gathering that feedback in order to make the process a little bit more transparent as well. So that's been a really cool insight into, how public budgeting works, especially at a large public institution like the University of Washington. And in that role, I also work on the funding for student organizations at the Evans School. So student interest groups like Green Evans, which is our like environmental policy like club or interest group. I work on reviewing their budgets, and we've been changing up that process this year to also make it more transparent as well as more equitable. So that's been really fun to work on. And I think I've been directly taking stuff from my classes into the the way that we use money at the Evans School. So that's been cool. And the final thing that I'll say is just that I was able to do a budget-focused internship this past summer with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in their budget office. So I worked on the fiscal year 2024 budget that's going to get submitted to Congress. And I had direct contact with the Assistant Secretary for Finances, which was very cool. And I got to like write a justification memo, pulling on all my memo writing skills that I honed in that management series. That is going to be sent to like the Office of Management and Budget. So that was a great opportunity to kind of see the budget process in action. And that was an opportunity that I found through Evans Jobs, or like our Evans Career Services Center last spring. And so I worked with them all summer. So again, you can tell I'm kind of like a finance person, like it's just like everywhere in my grad school experience, but that's by design. That's because I wanted it to be that way. And I was really interested in kind of deepening this skill set. And it's been just everything I wanted it to be. Nobody paid me to say that. That's true. How I feel.
Thank you, Kathy. And I appreciate you taking your time to connect with potential students as well. Emily and Oliver. Emily and Oliver are actually MPA alums working in and around the Seattle area. So I'm going to let you, Oliver, introduce yourself, and then we'll go introduce yourself, tell us what you're doing right now, and then Emily will follow.
Yeah, thanks so much, Professor Kyoko. So as Professor Kyoko said, my name is Oliver. I actually just graduated from the Evans program in June. And I am originally from Louisville, Kentucky. So for all the East Coasters-ish out there, East Coast, Midwest, it is okay. You can move to Seattle. The rain's really not that bad, I promise. But originally from Louisville, Kentucky, started in 2020, had 2 great years at the Evans School, and now I work for a small consulting company in Seattle called Burke Consulting. And I am a financial analyst at Burke, so work on all kinds of different projects with the state, city, and local governments for financial projects. Yeah. And I just found out that I just looked Emily up on LinkedIn, and it turns out that Emily worked at Burke before me. So Emily, I'll toss it over to you to introduce yourself.
Yes. So I'm Emily Walton Percival, and I graduated from the Evans program in 2017. And now I work at Sound Transit, the regional transit authority that's undergoing a major transit expansion in the region, as a manager in our financial planning and analysis group, which includes budgeting as well. My role there is now a people manager role, but I'm very still involved in financial modeling and debt modeling and that kind of stuff.
So Emily, while I still have you unmuted, I'll go ahead and ask you the second question. So how did your time at the Evans School and your education in budgeting and finance in particular help you get to, I guess, the second chapter in your career being at Sound Transit? So talk a little bit about Burke and then Sound Transit as well.
Okay. Well, the core skills I feel like I learned at the Evans School, which were really transformative in setting my career on a new trajectory, were really around financial statement analysis, cost benefit analysis, debt modeling, and really applying a systems thinking perspective to financial metrics. So everybody in every job has to do some form of budgeting, justify why they need a new headcount, say they need so many dollars of consulting dollars. But what I think the Evans School really does, at least for me, is translate all of those details, all of the rules around public finance that are particular to your organization or your state or your government, whatever it may be, the context may be, and tie all those strings together to help an executive decision maker understand how do those details roll up and translate into the future so that they can make good decisions that are going to forward the agency's objectives and keep the agency in a good fiscal and solvent position. I mean, the Evans School really took me from step one of that journey all the way through, which is why I was able to go into a financial and economics consulting role at Burke Consulting, where Oliver works now. And as I go further into my career and into a people leader position, where my job really now is not just the day-to-day tasks of that financial analysis and management, it's also around shifting how the agency uses financial analysis, the kinds of questions we ask and how we answer them, and how we bring these financial and analytical tools to bear on the problems that we're facing. And I heard this in every panelist I've ever heard say from the Evans School, but as I get more and more into my career, it's those management tools that I rely on more and more. So that's why I think the Evans School really brings these two components together in a neat way. It gave me the financial skills to get going in a financial role, and then it also supported me in roles that I didn't know I would have moving on in my career into that leadership role.
Thank you. Oliver? And I can repeat the question if you'd like, but go ahead.
That would be great, actually, just so I make sure I touch on all the points.
All right. So how did your time at the Evans School and your education in budgeting and finance in particular help you get to Burke Consulting?
Yeah. So I took a slightly interesting path through Evans, and that was I came in originally thinking I was going to get the nonprofit management concentration, and I came in and started taking classes and really enjoyed the classes, but had Professor Kyoko for that first budgeting class, and then took another class with Dwight Dively, and really started to enjoy it, and took more and more, and by the end of it, I had the finance concentration. But when I think about the most important parts of finance and budgeting that got me to where I work today, for me, it was really two parts. And it was one, it's the technical skill with Excel. You just kind of live in Excel in some of these roles, and just becoming really familiar with it. Don't necessarily need to be an expert. Like I would not qualify. I wouldn't say I'm some like huge expert in Excel, but just being comfortable with it and being able to manipulate data, handle a lot of data. I have coworkers who hear the word Excel and they just hand it to me. They don't want to mess with it at all. So just being able to build that comfort was really important, and something that the Evans School really helped with, especially in sort of the specific technical capacity of managing a bunch of dollars, a bunch of like budget expenses and then dollar signs and all that. And then I think the second part of it is more of the technical knowledge. And I think Emily talked about this a little more specifically, but just I think the Evans School gives you a really good broad understanding of a bunch of different pieces of sort of just like every piece of the financial world that you might come into contact. And there's certainly, you're not going to leave an expert in every little thing. I found in the last 3 to 4 months at Burke that I know absolutely, it seems like I know nothing, which of course is not the case, but it gives you a really, really solid foundation so that you can walk into a room where people are talking about some really technical, like specific finance knowledge, and you have the base knowledge to keep up with the conversation. It's a really good stepping stone for getting into like the hyper specific finance knowledge that will come later.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that there's still a steep learning curve even after you graduate. In as much as we give you a lot of knowledge, I always say it gives you the tools and the skill set, but a lot of the learning that you'll do is definitely going to be on the job. Especially I'll give an example. We had a panel in the financial modeling class of folks who took that class and now work in debt management. And they talk about being essentially immersed and relearning everything for the first 6 months on the job, which I'm guessing is where, Oliver, you are in terms of learning much deeper and more in more detail what we cover in class in probably 3 hours once a week. But there's really just a lot in budgeting and finance to learn. The key is that we give you that core skill, the analytical framework, to be able to not make those mistakes that we often see happening in the public space, and then to be able to be more curious, right? I always say curious here is really just going to be a really important part of your work. You have to be very logical, very methodical, but also very curious. You want to learn. And even once you get to that job, you're always curious, can I do something differently? Can I do something better? Am I doing the right way? Am I serving my constituents in the best way possible? How can I think about framing this differently? One last question before we open it up to the panel for Q&A. What skills and knowledge that you gained in the school have you found to be the most helpful on the job? And I'll ask the question for me as a faculty member, what skills can we bring back to the curriculum going forward that you'd like to see us train the future MPA students? And I'll start with you, Oliver, first.
Yeah, so sort of to build off the steep learning curve you were talking about there, I kind of joke right now that I know just enough to be dangerous, or like I know just enough to know that I don't really know anything. So I think I'll kind of double back and say, you know, the Excel skills were key. Those are super important. Just kind of the broad smattering of finance knowledge, but also I felt really comfortable in both, you know, Dwight Lively's classes as well as Professor Kyoko's classes to ask, you know, sometimes really specific questions. And I definitely came away with some more technical knowledge, like some specific technical knowledge that was really, really helpful. So, you know, each elective and each finance class is sort of structured around an idea, but I think there is still quite a bit of flexibility in all of the finance classes to, you know, if there is a certain piece that you're really passionate about, you can kind of go down that rabbit hole. And as I'm starting to find out is going down rabbit holes and becoming an expert in like really tiny things is really, really valuable.
Mm-hmm. Emily?
Could you just remind me the question quickly?
Sure. What skills and knowledge that you gained in the school have you found the most helpful on the job? But I think you alluded to this, but I think just reiterating it would be really beneficial.
Yeah. So I'd echo everything Oliver said, and certainly the Evans School gave me those building blocks, including skills in Excel, a framework for doing financial analysis that not only launched me into my career in finance, but it also it gave me a lens in which to view roles I was looking at and see, is this a role that includes the kind of analysis that I want to do? So some roles would be like a financial analyst role. Some roles would be like a financial consultant, but some roles would be a policy analyst role with a lot of financial analysis that's going to be baked into that role as well. And it gave me a skill set that I knew that I could apply broadly to the kinds of roles that I was interested in. And that sort of, I think, will apply across my career, you know, whether I spend the rest of my career in transit or I move to a different subject area, or maybe I stay in transit and I move, you know, out of a formal finance role. That financial analysis skill set is always going to be such a critical component of any job in the public sector, particularly because we're so committed to using public funds wisely. And so that means understanding whether you're in a program role, a policy role, or a financial role, understanding how does my program and the resources that are supporting that program benefit the people that we're serving, and is it the most efficient program it can be? Are we getting really good bang for buck out of that program? And then a huge part of that is the political environment of the agency that you work in, the organizational environment, and navigating those waters is certainly, I think, where I am at in my career, and understanding how to be judicious and strategic in how I approach these problems, right? I feel like I have the analytical skills. I've practiced in those analytical skills, and now I'm really learning on the ground, you know, how to bring those management techniques, that systems thinking perspective, to bear on my relationships within the agency and how to influence that conversation. So So the Evans School supported me right at the beginning, and then continues to kind of pay off more and more as I get further into that management piece of the role.
And I appreciate, Emily, you talking about how developing those leadership skills, finding out what kind of leader you are, what makes a good leader, what values you have, your ethical responsibilities, and how to essentially have an ethical lens when you do your work. I think a lot of people get excited when they take 522, the core class in budgeting and finance, and it's like, yes, I want to do more spreadsheets and more spreadsheets. And I'm like, well, budgeting is really difficult, because when you say you need to cut a budget, you have to know how to manage conflict in that situation. You have to know how to say, this is the best decision with the limited resources that we have. So it's really about managing that tension within an organization. So budgeting is really about managing people, managing programs, and managing expectations with the finite resources that you have. So in as much as you want to do a lot of spreadsheet work, I always encourage folks to actually develop the other set of skills: managing teams, conflict resolution, identifying what your leadership style is based on your personality, and figuring out what kind of jobs or roles you would take initially. And then, as Emily has talked about, is just seeing how you evolve in different positions. 5 years from now, I expect Emily will tell me, hey, I moved on from this position in Sound Transit and I'm moving on to my third leg, right? So your first job is never your last job, and you're always evolving and growing and taking on new leadership positions. And the further away you are from leadership, the further away you are from that spreadsheet work, but you're still involved in budgeting and finance in a core way. You just have a team of budget analysts that you're relying on and not doing that spreadsheet. So I always think of, I'll give you the tools and the skills to get you your first job, and then you evolve in your first job to get yourself into the second, third, fourth, fifth job as you grow on climbing that hierarchy in different organizations. So those are the questions I had for our panelists. I'm going to open it up for Q&A from our participants. And I see Stephen had a question for us. I am hoping and planning on participating in the executive MPA program. Will the finance and budget option be available through that program as well? Definitely, it is offered in the executive MPA. It is structured a little bit differently because the EMPA program caters to folks who are already seasoned. So those are folks who've been working and supervising teams, so they're already familiar with budgeting and finance. So we do structure that course a little bit differently. And then the suite of electives and the executive MPA program is often limited given how it is structured. But if you have additional questions on that, Dr. Miller can direct you to the additional resources available and talk to you a little bit more about that. Any other questions from our participants? Again, feel free to ask us. Buzamal, I hope I got your name correctly. I think this goes to our participants. If you had to redo the program, what would you do differently? Are there anything you could have done or not done in retrospect?
Well, I'll just say when I was a student, the finance and budgeting elective was not a formal option when I was at the Evans School. So I kind of cobbled it together myself. And part of how I managed that was I went over to the Foster School of Business to take some entrepreneurial finance courses there through their technology entrepreneurship certificate, which I completed. But I think I just had business school FOMO, and I really shouldn't have done that. And I'm really glad that the Evans School now offers some more classes and a formal focus on finance and budgeting. And if I could do it over again, I would do it while those offerings are available, the formal certificate with the Evans School, and just, you know, Kathy was saying sort of all finance all the time. Like, that's what I wanted at the Evans School. So that's what I would do.
Yeah. Oliver?
Yeah, I did not look very hard at classes outside of the Evans School, and certainly not to say that you need to, but I do think, there may have been a couple of classes that could have been interesting. So that's something that again, I'm not sure if I ever actually would have taken one, but something I probably could have looked into a little bit more. The only other thing I would redo if I went back is I would do a little bit more research about some of the courses offered. I had to make some tough choices on electives to take during some quarters, and just doing a little bit more research on which one would, was like really catered towards my interests. I think my biggest regrets are just taking one class instead of another. And it's kind of hard to know in the moment, but just doing a little bit more due diligence there.
Yeah. I would say, I think the most important thing is connecting with the faculty teaching the classes to figure out what is in the course, what are the assignments, what are the goals and the outcomes, and what skill sets you're hoping to develop. My advice to folks is always take the class that you can never teach yourself. Those are right. So figuring out, I always keep on saying, I wish I'd taken more management classes. I feel that is perhaps my weak point, even in my advanced careers, that I wish I had learned about my leadership style, figuring that stuff in the classroom and having, a collaborative process on that is really, really useful. I've always been good in accounting and finance. I've been doing accounting since high school. So for me, it comes to it's literally second nature. So I really didn't take any accounting courses in my graduate program because I already had a CPA and I was comfortable in that space. And I could teach myself accounting irrespective of which country or which accounting standards exist. So I think the most important thing is talk to the faculty early also in the program, just to figure out what courses you would take and which courses would be available, because not all courses are available every year. Looks like folks are a bit shy with questions. Again, please don't hesitate. Jackie and I are always available to answer any questions you may have. I'll put my email on the chat shortly, but please don't hesitate to reach out to either one of us if you have questions about the program.
And Sharon, I know during the prospective student open house, you talked about how these skills really transcend sectors, whether it's government or nonprofit. Can you speak a little bit more about that? I know that our alumni are all over the place, whether it is affordable housing, sustainable energy, or public finance. And can you talk to us about the career opportunities that follows with this specialization or focus?
Sure. And I think Emily and Oliver are great examples of how you can be both in public space and private space. So Burke Consulting is a private consulting firm whose clients are governments and nonprofits primarily. But the skills, when you talk about a budget, it really doesn't matter if you're making a budget for a governmental organization, a nonprofit. The numbers just need to add up. You may have constraints in a legal framework in government that doesn't exist in nonprofits, but then you have grants that have a constraint for you in a nonprofit, and you may not have that constraint with taxes in government. But how you develop a budget is really really pretty much the same. In for-profit, you have that motivation for profit maximization. So how you figure out you're going to price that widget of product you're producing is going to be slightly different from the lens you will have in creating a budget and figuring out what it costs you to deliver an essential public service. So how much it costs you for vaccinations, for example, or how much it would cost you to pave a mile of roads. But really what we're trying to do in that core class is give you those core skills of trying to understand what does it cost you to actually deliver a unit of service, and what are those key elements, and are you accounting for all the costs in delivering that service. So that's one core skill. The other one that Emily mentioned is really learning how to read financial statements. And after I do the financial statement analysis in class, I'm like, if you now go and look at the financial statements for Apple or Facebook or Bank of America, that actually makes sense as well, because you now know how to read those financial statements. So those skills transcend. We are focused on government and nonprofit, but those skills transcend to the for-profit sector as well.
And we have a participant who is really focused on environmental policy. So is there a way to explain the intersection between environmental policy and budgeting, even though they don't have a background in budgeting and finance?
I think this is a really good question, and it has gotten me really interested to read more in environmental policy. We had a guest speaker today in our financial modeling class talking about ESG criteria, that's environmental, social, and governance criteria on municipal securities, and how we are disclosing, for example, environmental risk. Think about Hurricane Katrina and its impact on local governments. Hurricane Ian and its impact on local governments in Florida, but also Katrina and local impact on the budget for New Orleans. So we are thinking about environmental policy in public finance. But then you can also think about just a lot of the infrastructure that we have in place to maintain clean water, to make sure we have sanitation, we are managing our garbage. A lot of that is financed with debt, and it's financed with user charges and fees. So every government service that you can think of, whether you're talking about social policy, environmental policy, is literally at the intersection of finance and that policy area. They're all intersected. So I always say budgeting and finance is that cross-sector skill. It's really not a concentration area per se. If you're interested in health policy, there's budgeting and finance in health policy. If you're interested in retirement and social security, there's budgeting and finance in that. If you're interested in environmental policy, there's budgeting and finance in that. If you're thinking about income inequality, that's taxation, there's budgeting and finance is that. So it's really a cross-sector skill, and it's an important skill to have. So that's why we have budgeting and finance in our core, and we offer it as a policy option. We don't have environmental policy courses, for example, in our core because we offer that as a policy option, but we consider budgeting and finance as that cross-sector skill that everybody graduating in an MPA program, irrespective of where you choose to go for your program, has to have that core budgeting finance skill, because you need to use these tool sets in making decisions and allocating resources.
And you just mentioned that you have guest speakers in your class. Can you speak to us about the types of guests that you bring in the class? I know our alumni are always participating in various ways, but what other types of guest speakers do you have?
So in PubPol 522, we have a panel of speakers come in every year to essentially talk to our students and give them a sense of, where they are in their career, what courses help them. So Emily Percival has done that for a few years. I didn't ask her this year round, but I asked her to join the webinar. I still use you. And then Oliver, I'm going to give Oliver another year before I ask him to come back. He's just started his new job at Burke. But we always have Evans alums come in. But our guest speaker today in class was, her name is Nora Wittstruck, and she is the Standard & Poor's. And Standard & Poor's is one of the leading rating agencies, credit rating agencies. She is the ESG sector lead for Standard & Poor's, and she was talking to us about how Standard & Poor's factors in that environmental risk in that credit rating process, that social and governance structure into that credit rating process in order to assign a government a rating. And these ratings are really important for these governments because They are used to then determine how much it's going to cost them to borrow to finance some of that infrastructure. And the higher your rating, just the same way as the credit score, the lower your borrowing costs are going to be. So it's really important to be able to factor those risks in there. But in addition to that, it's just thinking about what kind of disclosures. She was talking to us about the disclosures each government also has to make, and it's important to make those disclosures. So if you read some of the financial documents for the city of Seattle or King County, it will disclose the risk of earthquakes. The same way if you're in Florida, they'll disclose the risk of hurricane. And if you're in somewhere in California, they'll disclose the risk of fire and fire damage. So it's thinking about, what are the risks inherent in each particular jurisdiction? And keep in mind, governments can't pick up and move location. You're providing services within your community. So unlike for-profit entities, if you find the environment is too much of a risk for your operations, you would pack up your manufacturing plant and move it to another jurisdiction. Governments can't do that, and they're providing an essential service. But it's important that we understand what are the risks that those governments face to their revenue and revenue and taxing capacity. Sorry, that was my watch. Revenue and taxing capacity and the ability to meet their expenditures as they go forward.
Thank you. And if I can ask our panelists, as our prospective students are sitting here where you used to be a year ago, 2 years, 3 years ago, what advice do you have for them about applying to the Evans School?
Kathy, perhaps you can start and then we'll go to Oliver.
Sure. I mean, I think, everybody's journey to come to grad school is a little bit different. But I think something that was helpful for me was really thinking hard about what I wanted to get out of my graduate school experience and why I wanted this degree specifically over just, I want to get another degree so that I can advance my career and I can get better jobs down the line. I wanted to not kind of think about that and think more specifically, like, why do I want an MPA? Why do I want to go to the Evans School specifically, as opposed to, the many other nice MPA programs that are available out there. So just kind of doing some introspection and thinking about why this program was important to me was helpful. That's going to look different for everybody. But I think and hope that really came across in my personal statement. I mean, I got in and I'm here, so I must have done okay. But I would just think about what that means to you and how that looks to you as an individual.
Oliver?
Yeah, I think I'll echo some of the things Kathy said. Just having a conversation with yourself about, what do you hope to get out of this? And if you are able to identify something more specific, kind of like making sure that the Evans School can provide those things and like mapping out how you're going to get out of the program what you want. I would say the program is also, you get out of it what you put in. So kind of have that conversation with yourself as well. Everybody's in a different life spot. I came right out of undergrad, so I didn't have a whole lot of like life responsibility, but other people have kids, and that makes an entirely different challenge. But just kind of understanding that you get out of it what you put in. And then, I was going to say one other thing. The only other thing I was going to say is I came straight from undergrad, and given where I was at, I graduated undergrad in 2020 during a pandemic, and kind of given the circumstances, I have no regrets about coming to Evans. But I would encourage people who are like coming straight out of undergrad or recently out of undergrad to consider maybe you do want to spend a couple years in the workforce if you can, trying to figure out what you like, what you don't like. And your Evans experience is a lot more tailored once you have those couple of years. You have a better idea of what you actually want to study. and can help direct your classes and direct the way that you think about the Evans program a little bit better. Certainly not discouraging anybody from going straight to Evans. You know, for me, it was absolutely the right decision, but just something else to think about.
Yeah.
Emily?
I took some time between undergrad and graduate school, and I did a lot of different things. And I would just say, I'm really glad I took that time, because by the time I got to the Evans School, well, in deciding to go to grad school, I had spent time in nonprofits and local governments, and I knew the type of agency I wanted to work for and the type of work I wanted to do there. You know, that's really where I came to the Evans School and knew I want a technical skill that I can apply to these problems that I see floating around in my work environments. And that's what the Evans School gave me. And, you know, the reason I chose the Evans School is I just looked around at where do I want to live, where do I want to work, and who's been successful in the kinds of roles that I would like to have in those areas. And as someone mentioned earlier on the call, public agencies, nonprofits, and I'm sure even for-profit organizations around Seattle are to the gills with Evans students, right? And so when it came time to leverage my former experience combined with my graduate experience into a role that I knew would really propel me forward, there were communities around in Seattle to support me and network with me. Any Evans person that I have ever reached out to has been more than happy to have an informational interview with me, help me understand what their role is like and whether it'd be something I'd be interested in, make connections in their agency, wherever they work that can support me as well as I further my career. And that was really important to me. And the other thing I will say though about finance and budgeting in particular is that it's super transferable. So, and I just have to tell you, we try to hire financial analysts all the time and you can't always find them. And so even if you don't want to live in Seattle, like I did, I knew that. That's why I went to the Evans School. But as I get more in my career and I'm on more hiring panels, all I'm trying to do is I'm just looking, give me a financial analyst who's actually done this and thinking about these system questions and not just sort of like moving dollars in a journal entry from one cell to another, you know? And so if you can use the Evans School curriculum to help you frame up how you're going to think about doing that kind of work, I'm confident you could be a competitive candidate for any financial analyst role in any organization in the US, basically,
Yeah.
and probably.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon, I'm going to give you the last word. I see that we're a minute over time, but that's okay. You have the last word.
Wow, thank you. Again, thanks participants for taking the time to connect with us. Again, if you want to reach out, if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Dr. Miller or myself. Again, our curriculum has been carefully structured to allow you to work in different sectors, in different roles, and also just to help you support you throughout your career. We are thinking about these are the tools you need throughout your career. Some of them you'll use at the very beginning and others you'll use towards, right, at 5 years, 10 years after you graduated. But again, thank you very much for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you at the Evans School next year. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you to our panelists for taking your evening to answer questions for our prospective students. Bye.